We're on. Yeah, 50 years later, and the Buffalo Springfield still have that right. Something sure is happening here, and what it is ain't exactly clear. And Retake Our Democracy in this radio show, in our blog, in our action alert system, in our Zoominar series, try to help you keep informed, motivate you, and give you the tools you need to be active and effectively active. Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. Each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today we're going to be speaking with a pal of mine, Dahr Jamail, and he is an internationally known and award-winning journalist focused on climate change, climate catastrophe, also as a war correspondent as well. He wrote the book, The End of Ice, which is a powerful book, a real eye-opening book, a nightmare book. And I'd encourage you to read it. If you get a chance. It was named one of Smithsonian Magazine's best books of 2019, science books. And he was also a finalist for the Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award in 2020. So we've got a real expert on with us today. He's been on our shows before and was also a featured panelist on one of Retake's Zoominars, one of their very first. Last week, we spoke with the first Republican to ever be on a Retake radio show, Peter Smith. He's the president of the KSFR board of directors, but that wasn't why I had him on the show. He also is a former Republican lieutenant governor, state senator, and U.S. House representative. Interestingly, he lost his seat in the House to one Bernie Sanders. Oddly, that came about because Bernie was endorsed by the NRA because Peter had taken a position in favor of an assault weapon ban. And oddly, it was Bernie's endorsement by the NRA that contributed to Peter's losing his seat. At the GOP RNC, the Republican National Convention, he joined other Republicans in forming Republicans for Biden. And so we talked to him at length about his reasons for doing that. And it was just refreshing to speak with a Republican that actually could think and was reasonable. So you might want to check that out. You can watch all of our past shows by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and hovering over the actions menu, and you'll find Retake conversations there, and you can check them out at your leisure. And if you're driving around town right now and listening to the show and you can't hear all of it, it will be up on our website by midday on Saturday. While you're at our website, check out our election strategies and a toolkit for how you can be more involved in this crucial election. The toolkit was just updated last week, and our post on Labor Day focused upon the general and state elections. And, you know, I've said it many times, this is almost certainly the most important election in our lifetimes. Our election strategies make it very easy for you to be engaged in this election. And we really don't want to wake up on November 4th and face 4 more years of what we've been experiencing for the last 4 years. So just go to our website and check out our elections menu, and you'll find all kinds of tools and strategies for keeping you active. So with no further, I did want to mention really quickly that one of the updates we did was we kind of collapsed together some of the swing state activity and the key Senate races. And it turns out that Michigan, Colorado, Arizona, and Maine and Iowa are all swing states, but they also have winnable Senate seats where we could flip a Senate seat. And so actually in Michigan hold a Senate seat. So there's a way to get 2 for 1 there if you're working in any of those states. If you know anybody in those states, reach out to them, have conversations, and try and get them involved using our election strategies. And I did also want to mention that on September 15th at 6:30, we're going to have a Zoominar focused on water issues in New Mexico. It may not surprise you that we're a drought state, but it will surprise you that we actually have no capacity to manage our own water. And we're going to have 4 experts in water management and water quality on that Zoominar. So go to our website, go to the Actions and Events menu, and hover over and click on the Zoominar series for September 15th and join us for that. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, Dahr. It's been too long since we had a last chat. How you doing?
Thanks, Paul. Good to be with you.
Okay. Well, listen, I always let people introduce themselves. So I'm guessing most of our listeners know at least a bit about you, but maybe you can fill us in on your journalistic path to the present.
Well, very briefly, I became a journalist back in 2003 when I went to Iraq and started writing about the impact of the occupation on the Iraqi people, wrote a book about that, and then on the heels of that, wrote a book about the impact of the occupation on U.S. soldiers, and then co-authored a book with Truth Out's William Rivers Pitt about the occupation in general. And then in 2010, shifted over to environmental journalism, reporting on the BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, reported on that at length over the next several years. So there's some actually very direct tie-ins between patterns I saw there and the story that we're going to talk about today. And then on the heels of that, started reporting on the climate crisis, basically at the same time, and have been reporting on that up until very, very recently, and wrote the book, The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption, which you mentioned. And then actually have stepped out of journalism a year ago this month, but have kind of like, I don't know, a retired boxer or something. I've come out of retirement a couple of different times to do a couple of different articles, this one being one of them. And I'm very proud of this article and hope that it serves to help some people who are in harm's way of the oil and gas industry in New Mexico.
Okay, well, we're going to start talking about that right now. The motivation I had for calling and seeing if you could do the show was precisely to talk about the situation, and you wrote it up in your article for Truth Out. Fracking company has made it rain toxic water upon New Mexico without penalty. And I'm actually more shocked by the without penalty than that the gas and oil industry would be trying to rain anything on us whatsoever if there was profit to be made from it. But can you begin by describing the really horrific situation that befell the family in southeast New Mexico, where they had a leak impact their family so tragically?
Right. So Penny Aucoin and her family moved to Carlsbad, New Mexico, several years ago, and they were very happy living there. Were living a sort of a dream with their own place, with chickens and goats, and having their kids there. And then not too long after that, when the oil and gas industry came to town and started building pads right next to their home, literally close enough that their walls would vibrate and their windows would rattle as this infrastructure was being put in place. And then, of course, once the drilling started and methane venting and other things like this, literally birds started falling out of the sky near their home, dying. One of their chickens died. They all started experiencing health impacts, they being her husband, and their 2 kids, everything from migraines to skin rashes and other things, even worse than that. And so, and then that was ongoing up until this past January, when one evening they heard an explosion and they went outside to see what it was, and they thought it was raining, but in fact, a pipeline nearby their home had burst and was spewing so-called produced water. That's an industry term. What in reality it is toxic wastewater from the fracking operations. It was spewing that into the air and literally raining it down on the family, their home, their land, and their animals. And in the wake of that, they all got even more sick. And it's well known, for example, that direct assaults from the air and environmental pollution from fracking result in just generally chemical exposure for anyone living within 200 feet of that infrastructure, including higher rates of cancer, respiratory diseases, asthma, heart disease, and injury to small children, pregnant women, and fetuses. And that's very broad brushstroke. We could talk the whole rest of our time together just on health impacts. Mm-hmm. But her family saw that starting to play out even more so over time. And then to add insult to injury, the company directly responsible to that infrastructure, WPX, based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, basically offered the family to buy them a new chicken coop and a water bowl for their chickens. That was their initial offer, which is again kind of—
that was the best line in your report.
Right. If that doesn't get your blood pressure up, I don't know what will. And then basically the company said, keep the chicken off the ground for 5 days. So, that obviously the family had gone seeking medical attention and then help for the animals. And then other state officials said, don't eat the eggs, have the chickens put down, and don't grow anything on the land because it's highly contaminated. And basically what's gone on is that the family now is in negotiations with the company to try to get something like real compensation after being insulted. Beyond that, what I just mentioned, were offered an insultingly low amount of money for what has befallen them. And so they're in the process of trying to remedy that. And then to add insult to even further injury is Penny Acoin and her family have gotten no assistance whatsoever from the state of New Mexico. There have been no actions brought against WPX by New Mexico's governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, and her so-called other regulatory groups within the administration. So the punchline to all that is the New Mexico's Oil Conservation Division, the OCD, has performed no independent investigation whatsoever of what happened to this family, and has already closed the case against WPX without issuing a warning, a fine, any kind of criminal or civil penalty, or even a revocation of their permit to continue to drill.
So one of the things, and you answered my next question right there. Good job. And so we'll move on to the fourth question, which is basically, as I had stated earlier, you don't expect much from the oil company, but we do have a governor here who's gotten national notoriety in terms of her proactive, aggressive, science-based response to the COVID vaccine, and probably hundreds, perhaps thousands of New Mexicans are still alive because of it. And we're almost an island in the Southwest of states that have done as well as can be expected in combating this, Navajo Nation aside, and that's a significant aside. But from what you've found, it's not just in relation to the Acoin family, but the state of New Mexico essentially is doing nothing about methane flares or produced water leaks and other leaks statewide. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
Well, since Governor Lujan Grisham took office 2 years ago, saying that she and her administration have done nothing about what we're talking about, is I think being generous, because they haven't done nothing. What they've done is continue to allow and enable companies like WPX and others that are basically carrying out widespread environmental destruction across the state of New Mexico, widespread contamination and overuse of the meager amounts of water available in the state of New Mexico, not just allowing them, but enabling them to continue to move forward with this work and what they're doing, and along with all the deleterious impacts to the environment in New Mexico. And of course, that includes to human beings living anywhere within proximity to this infrastructure, not even to talk about impact of other species on other species. So since Governor Grisham took office 2 years ago, there's been at least 901 incidents reported by the 10 biggest companies operating in the state of New Mexico. And we see these numbers uptick daily. Literally, as I was writing this story, I filed it, and within 3 days, when I got the edited copy back from my editor that I was working with, said, "Hey, well, I checked this hyperlink and you need to update this number." So it's ongoing on a daily basis as far as the number of.
And this is self-report.
This is self-reporting, right? Yeah. So this is the company's self-reporting. So it's pretty safe to assume that these numbers are lowball. And then since this has been ongoing, many findings, just looking into Penny Acoin's family's case against this company and the research being brought together as far as the impacts on this family, it essentially found that Governor Lujan Grisham and all the other relevant state agencies, of which there are several, that are theoretically responsible for regulating this situation and protecting New Mexico's environment and the state's people, that really the state agencies and the governor have taken little to no action to supervise, monitor, control, and penalize WPX and the other oil and gas companies, even for the major incidents that they've caused, like the one that's impacted the Acoin family, which were tended to be spills of this so-called produced water or even natural gas and crude oil.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly appalling because we sort of thought we were going to get more from this governor, although we were concerned with the level of donations to her campaign from the gas and oil industry. I want to remind our listeners that it is times like these that KSFR is more important than ever, offering timely news and alerts, but perhaps even more importantly, just a wide range of programming just to keep you sane. So for those of you who can afford it, please consider making a contribution and thinking of it as your ticket to admission through Democracy Now!, Retake Our Democracy, and a host of other shows that are so important to keeping informed and entertained. And today all you have to do is go to ksfr.org and go to the donate button and click on it and send them 10, 20, 50 bucks. Appreciate it. Today, we're speaking with internationally respected climate author and author of The End of Ice, Dahr Jamail. And let's get back to that conversation. You research climate issues pretty extensively all over the world. Have you found other states or nations where this kind of disregard that you're seeing in New Mexico is prevalent, or is this kind of unique to us?
It's certainly not unique, unfortunately. New Mexico is if you look at the policies of the current government of the state of New Mexico, is in relation to the oil and gas industry, I think you can start to talk about it in the same group of states of like Oklahoma and Texas that have basically completely opened themselves up to the oil and gas industry and given this industry carte blanche in order to generate revenue for the state. despite the obvious severe health and environmental impacts of this industry. So it's certainly not unique. It's definitely on the worst end of what's as far as states that are basically just giving these companies carte blanche to operate however they're going to operate, as long as that money keeps coming into the state coffers.
Okay. Okay. Let's look outside New Mexico a bit. One thing I've noted in several retake posts is that the COVID and the election and Trump tweeting have sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the public forum and the public debate. I've heard precious little about climate change except in relation to catastrophes, whether they're fires or floods or hurricanes and so forth. But not in terms of international or national efforts, certainly not national in the United States, efforts to really do something about climate change. Is this my imagination, or has it sort of taken that back seat at a time when it really shouldn't?
No, I think that what you're experiencing is what most of us are, even me as a person who's tracked the climate very, very closely for a decade. Is, it's kind of hard to keep your eye on that looming disaster when there's more immediate things that could kill you that are happening right now in the present tense, speaking directly to the virus or the fascism here, the right-wing fascism within the United States. So, it's those become, when people are going out and protesting with Black Lives Matter anywhere, it's kind of hard to pay attention to the climate crisis when, if I'm in a demonstration anywhere in the country with Black Lives Matter, some right-wing vigilante could drive through here with his car and take a bunch of people out, or show up with a automatic weapon. So of course that is garnering more attention against the backdrop of the virus, which is now an ongoing danger that we've all kind of lived to accept and kind of deal with. And so, but that's obviously very, very unfortunate. I don't know what we can do about that with these immediate life-threatening dangers, while the climate crisis is hitting levels, of course, this summer that we haven't seen before. Just looking at the Arctic, what's happening in the permafrost. I mean, just to give people an example of how fast things are unraveling climate-wise across the planet. I interviewed Vladimir Romanovsky for my book about the thawing permafrost in the Arctic, and in my view, he's the most prominent, knowledgeable permafrost expert on the planet. And he gave very alarming signals that, look, we're seeing dramatic increases in the temperature of the permafrost, even 10 meters down below the surface, where the ice is literally quickly warming up to the point of reaching thawing. And then when my book came out, 1 year after I had interviewed Dr. Romanovsky, he was co-author of a study that showed that permafrost was actually then already thawing at a point that they didn't expect for another 70 years. And the amount of CO2 and methane in that permafrost that will be released is a staggering amount. And that alone is going to generate feedback loops and temperature increases across the planet that could as much as double what we've added since the Industrial Revolution began. So extremely disconcerting developments on the climate front, while we're kind of having our attention diverted to these more kind of immediate life-threatening crises.
Yeah, well, I know you're not too optimistic about our being able to prevent much of the destruction looming ahead. But have you heard any encouraging research or political action that could at least offer some hope that the future to which we must adapt could be survivable or even thrivable? Not sure if thrivable is a word, but
the short answer would be no, but with the addendum that what I am seeing, though, on local levels in certain groups is people's acceptance of where we are, and then that enabling an ability to adapt and make some very immediate, profound local changes, starting, of course, within each of us, but then in the immediate groups where we live. I think it's as we see systems break down across this country and this country continue to fragment, and certain states basically start pulling away from the federal government, possibly for their own survival of people within that state. I cite where I live in Washington, where we saw Washington, Oregon, and California during the height of the pandemic casualties start to kind of talk about, okay, how are we as a region going to start working to get through this? I'm hopeful for things like that, but even on a more local level, where as we see this country continue to disintegrate, which it is and will worsen, that locally, that actually, I think, frees us up to step completely or even further outside of that box of how things have always been done, and how are we going to adapt locally, taking care of each other, food, water, medical care, community building, things like that. And I'm actually seeing that in numerous places around the country.
Okay. We've got about two and a half minutes left for the radio show, and a bunch of questions left. So maybe you can take a minute or so on this one, and then we'll pause and that'll be the end of the radio show, and you can give information about where you can be found, and then we'll do some more for the podcast. But I'm interested in what you think about the Green New Deal, and if you know much about the Green Amendment. I'm not sure if you do know much about the Green Amendment and its intention to basically create amendments in states across the nation, amendments that ensure people's rights to clean water, air, and land. What do you think of these initiatives?
I don't know much about the amendment you just spoke of. I have researched the Green New Deal, and I really don't think about them because I think it's a waste of time to really look at things in sort of a pipe dream way, where we have an overtly authoritarian state that we're already in, moving to further consolidate power during this upcoming election, and has made no bones about doing so. So talking about legislation while we have a Senate completely controlled by a fascist party is frankly a waste of time.
Okay, well, I agree with you. The degree to which we talk about it in Retake is more like aspirational, and like we're never going to get any of this as long as we've got that. So get in the game. So we
Right.
a minute left here, Dahr. Can you tell people how they can find you and your book and your publications?
Sure. Well, the book can be found in your local bookstore there, or ordered online.
Works.
And the book, well, I think most of my books at least. And my website is dahrjamail.net, DAHRJAMAIL.net. And then I am working on another project now where I'm co-authoring a book with Stan Rushworth it's called The Changing Earth, and that website is thechangingearth.net. thechangingearth.net. And it's basically a collection of indigenous voices, people talking about how did we get here, how they see all these converging crises, and basically how do we conduct ourselves during this time. In the book, the aim of the book is to bring in sort of a spiritual ballast for people as things intensify around them. And thus far, I can say, working on it, it's absolutely had that impact on me personally.
Oh, wonderful. I can't wait to, one of the things that we say all the time in Retake is that we're not going to be able to change legislation until we change our heads. And we've got to take a look at things from a completely different perspective. So I want to thank you, Dahr, for being with us today. Again, if you're listening to this in your car or around town, you can hear the rest of the conversation at retakeourdemocracy.org. Please stay engaged. We've got, as of this recording, I believe 55 more days before the election. And as Dahr so astutely stated, if we don't get rid of this guy, Green New Deal, Green Amendment, none of it's going to matter. And 4 more years of this could just seal our fate. So no excuses. Get out of your comfort zone. Go to retakeourdemocracy.org. We've got 4 election strategies there for you. And we'll be back next week. Thank you very much. By the miracle of podcasts, we're back. And we've only got about 10, 15 more minutes with Dahr, but we're going to try and squeeze in the rest of the questions that I had for him. I'm guessing you think that while there is merit in these kinds of like the Green New Deal efforts, we very much need to escalate our work in ways that perhaps aren't even, on the immediate policy table. What would you think would be the best strategies if you were like king of the universe, and you could pretty much dictate policy worldwide? Is there anything you can imagine that would make any kind of a really significant impact?
Well, my obvious primary concern is the climate crisis. Is just speaking specifically to that. Essentially all CO2 emissions and methane emissions need to be brought down to as close to zero as possible in as short a time as possible. How that happens, I don't know. But the fact is, as indicated by what happened globally in March, where we literally had a global shutdown, and the reduction of emissions that happened because of that, it shows that it is possible. I mean, that's one of the silver linings, and there's many silver linings to the COVID-19 crisis,
right?
But that it is possible collectively for us as a planet to make a shift like that would see that immediate of a change. So I think that's a hopeful thing, but I think, that obviously has to happen, but it's overwhelming to talk about these things on a global level. And for me, and I think people reading the news on a daily basis, and I just think it's very important. You mentioned it before. The first thing we have to change is our thinking, and change how am I living my life, and is that it truly in concert with my values, and then from there into my immediate community, and doing the work there. And then that energy is going to go out from there, at the risk of sounding a little woo-woo, but that is how change actually happens. And so, for example, where I live, it's an extremely progressive place, even more so than Santa Fe, albeit much smaller, and Port Townsend. And there's a lot of people here that want to, asking big questions like this. And I put it back on the community. Well, we have this highly toxic paper mill right in town. How about we look at changing that first, and then maybe the world a little bit later?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So do you think that is there a way that the Black Lives Matter, you referenced it a little earlier, that movement can translate into some kind of integration of climate justice and racial justice, and maybe help to advance our work on climate justice?
Well, the energy's certainly there, and I think I'm really glad you bring up that direct parallel, that we can't talk about only solving, or not solving, but trying to make things better in relation to the climate crisis without talking about, all of the things that Black Lives Matter is addressing, specifically the gross racial issues, but environmental justice and racial justice are essentially the same thing at this point, and always have been. And so I think having, all of these solutions are essentially going to be the same thing. I know I'm speaking a bit vaguely, but I think, we can't talk about the climate crisis and what needs to happen there at this point for adaptation and taking care of people, without also simultaneously addressing these egregious racial issues, and other issues, gross economic disparity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And people, for example, living like the Acoin family, these are not people of wealth that are living right next to these pipelines that explode, right? So this story that we talked about kind of underscores that. You don't have the CEO of WPX does not have his house right next to a pipeline. So until all of that is addressed, then none of it's addressed.
Okay. So the other major thing that we talked about that is sucking a lot of the air out of the room is the COVID. And one of the possible silver linings, you said that there are many of them, is that I think that we're dramatically feeling the impact of what happens when you disregard science. And that's what Trump has done. And do you see much hope of activists and journalists being able to connect that dot to the climate crisis that may not have as immediate an impact, although we're recording this on Monday, Labor Day, and I saw in the newspaper today that it's projected to be 121 in Los Angeles today. So we are experiencing it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's record high temperatures across the entire West as we're speaking. And not even talking about what's happening in the Arctic, or that one of the leading Greenland ice sheet scientists less than a month ago basically said Greenland's past the point of no return. No matter what happens now, that nothing's going to stop that ice sheet from melting. And if all of it melts, or when all of it melts, that's 20 feet of sea level rise right there. So you can kiss just about every major coastal city on the planet goodbye. And it's not if, it's when. So this is ongoing. And I think at this point, we really don't, I mean, I don't want to undercut what you just said, but if people can't see what's happening now regarding runaway climate crisis, reading another scientific report isn't going to help. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just kind of, it's so egregious at this point. It's kind of like what happens with COVID. Well, let's just ignore it, and the governors of Florida and Oklahoma and Texas can just go right ahead and open up their states and watch what happens. So we're at a point in the dystopia at this point where if people can't see the immediate impacts of the climate crisis, just like they were unwilling to deal with the science around the virus, then how much worse does it have to get? I kind of shudder to think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So hopefully the last two questions will elicit a little bit of silver lining, or a thread of silver lining. How confident are you that Biden is going to be able to defeat Trump? And assuming a Biden win, how far do you think we can push him into meaningful climate action? He's not exactly a fervent progressive.
Well, all the polls show that Biden has a pretty substantial lead over Trump. So if there was going to be a legitimate election, I'd feel very, very confident that Biden would win. But we already see Trump doing, what he has been doing for months, which is to overtly delegitimize the viability of the election, and already, basically putting out memes, telling people to vote twice on purpose, intentionally trying to destabilize any faith in the system, so that if the results come out and Trump doesn't win, therefore he doesn't have to leave because it wasn't a legitimate election. I think, any talk of the election and all of that is irrelevant at this point. The one question that really matters is what happens after the election when he loses the vote and refuses to leave. That's going to be the moment where are there enough people on the streets, sustained over time? What happens when the federal thugs in unmarked uniforms and vehicles get called out en masse to deal with the unrest? What happens as the violence continues to escalate? In those months following from early November until probably January, what happens in that time frame? How do the general police behave? How many people in the military refuse to deploy in the streets? Those are going to be the moments that define what happens next, not whether Biden wins the vote or not.
Yeah. Did you by any chance see the David Brooks article about that?
I did not.
The New York Times. I'll send it to you. He basically lays out what's likely to happen. This is a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like what you just laid out, only more graphically. And he closes with, "What will you do?" And, it's going to be time to, like you say, hit the streets in a sustained way. It's scary. So then that didn't give us much hope. Let's try for the last one. What gives you hope, Dahr?
Well, as I kind of dissected the word hope a bit towards the end of The End of Eyes, because I had to, because I was forced to, given what I had learned reporting on, doing the book and seeing how dire things are with the climate crisis. And so I try not to use the word very much, but I prefer really, how can I be of service? Because no matter how dire things are and how much more extreme things get, I still feel absolutely morally obliged to serve other people, other species in the planet. And so there is no shortage of things that need to be done in the immediate place where I live, not even talking about going out into ever widening concentric circles from there. But the question is, how can I best serve? And that doesn't change no matter what happens externally. And I'm seeing more and more people step forward in that way. And how can I serve future generations? And so there is no shortage of things to do. And if I can't think of something to do, it's a failure of my own imagination or my own willingness to go out there and serve and not be self-centered, but ask, how can I serve? How can I make someone else's life a little bit better? So I think if we approach things that way, then we're going to be motivated every day to go do what we can.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Dahr. And as always, it's a pleasure to chat with you. When are you, any likelihood of getting you to Santa Fe anytime soon?
Well, I'm sure as hell not flying amidst this shit show, but I don't feel safe doing it. But if I'm ever going to do a road trip your way, I'll certainly let you know, Paul.
Okay. And again, I want to thank Dahr Jamail for being with us. You can tell people where to find your information one more time before I close off.
Sure, I'll just leave people with the website for the forthcoming book, which is thechangingearth.net.
Okay, yeah. And when will that be coming out? Do you know?
Our hope and goal, and we're working feverishly to make it so, is that this book is in people's hands by fall of 2021. So in a year, if we have our way, within a year.
Okay, well, I've been, that sounds like something that I'm really going to want to get my hands on. Maybe I'll get an autograph on it when I see you next. All right, that's it for today. And please do take a look at Retake Our Democracy's election strategies. You can find them and if you're listening to this, you can just go to our website now and hover over the election menu and take a look at the 4 strategies we've got. In particular, the Get Out the Vote strategy is a way for you to encourage 50, 60 friends in like 5 minutes to make sure that they understand how they can vote in their state and how they can confirm their registration, because so many people have been booted from the registration rolls. It's just vitally important that every vote gets counted, and every vote gets counted on November 3rd, because as Dahr was relating, if almost all the Democrats' votes aren't being counted until the next day, Trump's going to be on the air saying, look, I'm winning all these states. Now they're going to go pile in all their illegitimate votes. The election's over, I won. And we just don't want that on November 3rd. So we'll be back next week. Thank you very much for being with us, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.